How's it going?
Good, good. Now you're in Portugal now, right?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a crazy time.
Yeah, I mean you were in Sweden before, and now you're in Portugal. What was the motivation for moving?
So we had to because of visa reasons. We were actually passing through Sweden in the beginning of March. We were both going to move to Amsterdam originally because Sweden nor the United States will let me and my partner live together in either of our home countries. But under EU law, we're allowed to settle in a different EU country. And so we did a bunch of research, and Amsterdam seemed like a viable option. And then we were actually moving all of our stuff out of her apartment when the borders all closed on us, and we got stuck in Sweden. We were really lucky. We were able to stay at her parents' summer cabin in the woods that was unoccupied. So it was kind of this like magical ability to stay in the woods during COVID. It was, isolating and quiet and calm. But Sweden eventually got back to me. I had a pending visa extension for about 4 months, and they got back and kindly asked me to leave.
Wow.
And so we were told on a Monday that we needed to get out, and our lawyer said that by the following Monday we should be out of the country. And so we booked tickets that night and flew out that following Saturday. And there were only 5 countries in the world that were both open to visitors coming and that were gay friendly. So out of that list, we looked at Portugal and we were like, okay, that sounds good, let's go.
Well,
So
Portugal's a
now we live
beautiful
here.
place. Portugal's a beautiful place. I mean, I've seen some of the photos that you posted, and I'm like, wow, it's really quite gorgeous.
Yeah.
It could be worse.
Yeah, it definitely could. Neither of us have ever been here before, but we find that the people are super warm and welcoming and have had a really good experience so far. So,
Are you in a city or are you in a rural area?
so we were originally in Lisbon, but after spending about a month there, we couldn't really adapt from being in the countryside for 4 months. We both kind of just fell in love with rural life again. Like I grew up in rural settings and I really enjoyed returning to it. So we ended up moving to a smaller town called Setúbal, and it's about 35 minutes south of Lisbon. We wanted to move to the countryside, but it's really hard to rent a house in the countryside in Portugal. There's not many options, and because neither of us speak Portuguese yet, we had a difficult time finding a place that was willing to and able to speak in English. And so we were fortunate to find the place that we have, and we're in like a little old town on walking streets, so it's pretty quiet. And we're gonna make our roof terrace into a little oasis with lots of plants. So we can kind of feel like we're in the countryside a bit.
Yeah, I saw your photo of the roof terrace in your Instagram story, and I was like, oh, I'm so jealous because I live in Mexico City, so I don't have outdoor space. And with the quarantines, I basically, other than walking my dog around the neighborhood, I've been indoors for 5 months now. So
and we were really afraid of that, and we were really lucky in the last place we were at, and so both of us need the outdoors so much, emotionally and psychologically, that we were like, we have to have some kind of outdoor space when we were looking. And it was a large part like why we didn't settle in Lisbon. It's like you can't really find outdoor space there. It's too expensive if you do, too, out of our price range. So
right. Well, and your work does revolve around the rural experience and the politics of the rural experience, and so it seems more appropriate as well that you would try to find some place that has more of your sensibility too. You have 2 pieces in the Existimos exhibition, Pink Pits, Rednecks, and then The Weight of All These. And I'm curious, can you give us a little bit of background about these 2 different pieces and what the messages are that you're delivering with them? We've had so much interest in your work, and I'm telling you, like half the artists in the show are like, when are you interviewing Amber? I want to hear more about her work. You know, I want to. So I'm so
thank
excited.
you so much. I finally got the chance to listen to your guys' curatory talk yesterday because things have just been so crazy with me. I didn't get the chance before. But I really appreciated what you guys said and the little shout out you gave me. I'm so happy that I found you guys as well. And that's been really great. And regards to the two pieces I have in the show, they're both kind of some of the first work that I've really done approaching my queer identity. I didn't come out, well, I came out as bisexual several years ago, back in about 2016, but I had been married before in a heteronormative relationship. And I got married quite young. So my queer identity was kind of suppressed in this way. And especially like growing up in the South, even though I grew up in a, back to land community and I had lesbian, aunts, they're not my real aunts, but they were my aunts. And I grew up around a lot of queer people. That identity within myself was suppressed because of a lot of the wider culture that I was surrounded by in Arkansas. And then when I started to kind of explore my queer identity as a young adult and moved to Los Angeles, I really didn't identify with the queer, like kind of metronormativity, the queer identity of an urban space. I didn't know any of the pop culture because I grew up without electricity and running water. I had never really, watched these queer icons. I didn't know any of their names. And so I felt very removed from that and almost kind of like afraid of exploring that for fear of rejection. And so I kind of like really suppressed it for a long time. And then I decided to do a piece exploring how confessions can be purified, and through that like process, they become abstracted and able to like become this kind of beautiful transformation. And kind of looking back at the South in a way of reconciling the feelings I had with being so close to religion without ever being a part of that religion, but it kind of being imposed upon me. So I did another piece called Between Churches, and it was like based on how I used to get around the question of what church you go to. And I would always say, oh, I'm between churches. And it was a way of kind of skirting the thing that you were an atheist and you don't go to a church in the South, which is just like, oh, that's not appropriate.
Unheard of.
Yeah. So I was kind of exploring religion. And through this, I started doing these confessions onto water-soluble fabric and then purifying them in water in my studio and then getting these kind of abstractions of thread. And at the same time, I started talking with my ex about a divorce, and we started kind of going through divorcing. And during this process, over the span of a weekend, I came out to him and I was like, I think I'm gay. And he was like, yeah, I think you're gay. And we had like this really great conversation about it. And I went back into the studio and I looked at the confessions that I had been stitching that I hadn't purified yet. And they were all about being gay. And it was these confessions that like, I was just kind of letting my mind run and not really thinking about what I was producing. And then once I let myself say it, I saw it all around me in all my work. And so that piece ended up being part of my thesis show and was the weight of all these secrets. And it was kind of like a piece that didn't start out being about being in the closet because I wasn't really that aware I was in the closet because it was so suppressed. And then the Pink Pits Red Necks was kind of what was bringing me to the weight of all these secrets. Was I kept going back to the South and reconnecting with a lot of people I grew up with and kind of reconnecting with the fact that a lot of these people were a part of the queer community. And I was really interested in highlighting how they didn't fit into the urban idea of who lives in the South and who these people are. And this was in 2016 when I took that photograph. And at the height of the election, at the height of Trumpism, and at the height of people really blaming that on rural communities in the United States. And so having come from that place and not seeing that as my identity of a rural space, I was like trying to break that stereotype or show that there's like more diversity in that space than people were thinking around me. And so that piece kind of like, I took that photograph and then I made the Weight of All These Secrets. And then I went back to the print of that photograph and I was like, I know exactly what to do with this now. I want that armpit, because that was a picture of one of my like dear friends growing up, and he's gay and he's in the South, and so many gay people in the South hide their sexuality and never are able to come out. And the little peak of the pink pits was just like this hiding of their identity within a rural, heteronormative space. There's this little window into that sexuality. And I wanted to like bring that out and have that pouring out into the space. And so the two pieces kind of overlapped and intertwined around my own coming out story. And I'm hoping to do more work in that similar vein.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I remember I grew up in Indiana. And so in high school, the group of my friends, a very small group, we were all gay. And so our symbol was like, oh, if you wear red socks on Friday, that means that you're gay. And so we would all wear red socks, and then we would sit at our lunch table and giggle at anybody else who had a hint of red on their, on their. But you find these ways like to try to symbolize and communicate and find some sort of community in the midst of a culture that really can be quite violent towards gay people. I know that the theme of violence comes up in your work quite a bit as well. Have you experienced violence as a queer person, and how is this transforming in your work? How are you healing through your own work in that too?
Yeah, I would say that the violence that I've experienced in my life is not focused around my queer identity. I think that as a queer individual, there's a part of your queer identity that you can never really hide. I find that like looking back on my life, I was unintentionally, or I guess intentionally by other people, outed before I knew I needed to be out. And so there was definitely something that was always kind of showing within my identity. But the violence I've experienced in my life and that I'm working through my work is mostly it's emotional and psychological violence, and sometimes physical violence. And then the physical violence of my, friends and family and fellow community. I think coming from a rural, poor community, the rates of violence are so high, especially domestic violence. And, finding ways of talking about that shared trauma, because even if it hasn't personally happened to you, knowing close friends of yours who have been murdered is something that does deeply affect you. And those issues around, gun violence and, gun ownership in a culture that is really protective of its guns makes it personal, and it makes it something that you've been personally affected by. And so like talking more directly about violence, I'm working on a piece that is specifically about domestic violence in the South and in the United States, which is focusing around, I can kind of show a little, I'm doing these little kind of crochet doilies out of scraps, and it's supposed to sort of look like what domestic women, they crochet doilies for their pots and pans, but I noticed that the shape of them is also a target, and I can't really separate the connection with domestic female practice from being targets of violence. And so I started stitching these about a year ago, and it's been the thing that I've been able to continue as I've been moving and COVID and all this different stuff. And I'm making 58 of them and flying with them to the United States, where I shoot them with guns until they're full of holes, and then expanding upon that with threads to kind of really show the brutalization of domestic violence. And the reason why I'm doing 58 is because every month in the United States, 58 people are killed in domestic violence, which I think is an insane amount of number of people that are killed without there ever being a mention of it on a national stage.
Well, and most likely during the quarantines, those numbers have risen significantly, being locked inside with the abuser and things. I think one of the things that you said that stuck out to me was this idea of like in queer identity, you're talking a little bit about how we signal to one another, but also like the effect of a restrictive culture on our ability to develop into the people that we really are, because we create these ways of masking ourselves, and art is such a great way to to find our way out of that. And it sounds to me like you use art in a very healing way as well. Like it's very much a part of your process of becoming who you are.
Yeah, I think that for me personally, the projects I work on are part therapy. And I was asked in an interview once in grad school about how I felt about the fact that my work deals with emotions. And I always think about that as the strangest question I've ever been asked, because I was like, why wouldn't my art deal with emotions? Emotions is the most humanist experience. It's something that we all can relate to. It is something that every human has to deal with and every day and every moment of their life. So yeah, my work does with emotions, and I don't find that as problematic.
well, the question itself reveals a sort of bias towards commercialism, as opposed to the expression that art, the potential expression of the human experience that art contains within it. So it's kind of an interesting question to be asking out of a grad school program too.
Yeah, and it wasn't the grad program that really turns out commercial artists. So I don't really know where exactly that was coming from. And he wasn't a curator of a commercial gallery either. So who knows?
I think that there's all these different ways that we kind of work our way out of the core of a culture and kind of find our way to express ourselves. And I think sometimes when work has an emotional quality to it, from the inside, there's no way for, people are trying to find a way to relate to it, because, even artists that I've spoken to are surprised when the viewer sees their story, even though that's not the aspect of themselves that they were trying to portray. So, so it's kind of it's a blended reality for sure. Definitely. Are you, I mean, with the pandemia and the restrictions that you've had and stuff, I mean, it's a miracle that you've been able to find ways to continue working. And so you're a materials person. You're working with textiles and things. Are you finding new sources for your materials? How are you expanding that at a time when it's difficult to find these things?
Yeah, so I was, as I would say, past Amber was very kind to future Amber by my last 2 weeks of grad school. I had access to the large format printer that I kind of developed this series of work on. And my past self spent those 2 weeks just printing almost like every day, every image I had. No idea what I'm going to do with it. I'm going to print it. And thank goodness I did, because I was not planning to be in the situation I was in. I wasn't, really planning to leave the Bay Area. I was kind of planning to stay local. And then everything got turned on its head when I took a trip to Sweden for 2 weeks and met my soulmate and decided to move across the world. And so all this kind of happened right on the tail end of graduating and kind of threw me into being quite mobile. So like the pandemic has been has made us move once, but before that, I've moved every 4 months since 2018. So I've been kind of on the move. I've been at different art residencies, different parts of the country. And so I kind of have kept these like rolls of the photographs I printed, and then I kind of unroll them and see what I have and start to kind of work with that. It's taken my work in directions I didn't expect, and I've continued to photograph along the way. I have not been able to print any of those photographs, but I've been starting to make collections of them digitally and map out projects and ideas I have for when I am able to print, and hopefully that will start being soon. And I've been working a lot more with scraps and kind of more of a collage aspect as I've gotten to images that maybe I don't think that the image is that interesting as a photographic piece, but different parts of it, like the colors or the way it interacts with different images have been interesting to me. So it's been pushing me in directions I never would have expected to really go, but places that I think that when I do get access to a printer back and, you know, more space and all of that, that it will really like inform my work a lot. And then I've also been working with found materials a bit more. I did a piece back in grad school called Contraband, where I took rocks from the parking lots of national parks because they were the rocks that weren't protected. And I was thinking about the proximity of protection and the proximity of value. And so why is a rock in the parking lot not protected or valued, where a rock 5 feet away is? And kind of like those rocks were taken from somewhere and dumped here for gravel. And aren't those rocks just as precious as these rocks? How do we assign value to nature? And so I took these rocks and I would wrap them in thread and kind of make them precious and make them protected. And I did that series, and then I really was very happy that series got collected. And I went off to Sweden and I was like, I really want to protect more things. And so I started kind of expanding upon that. And it was a series I started in quarantine, especially because, you know, not going anywhere, and it was just me and my partner for 4 months in the woods, and we would kind of like get cabin fever. And so we would go out on walks, and being in the Swedish forest, you see so many different things that I've never seen before, like the moss there, the landscape's different. And so I just started kind of picking up different things on my walks and wrapping those in different ways. And so I really enjoyed that process when I was in quarantine. And now that I'm walking around another new landscape, I'm hoping to start collecting these objects again and wrapping them again, and kind of bringing this idea of care and making precious the kind of things that maybe people wouldn't look at and be like, oh, that's a precious pine cone. And I'm like, that's one of the most beautiful pine cones I've ever seen in my life. Like, kind of honoring those moments.
Well, I mean, your work is fascinating, and hearing the stories behind them has really revealed even more information. And I continue, every time I look at your work, I just, you know, I continue to find new ways to see it, and hearing about it is really a spectacular gift. And one of the reasons that we chose you for the show was because we wanted to know more. You know, I mean, you're a very good storyteller with your work, and so it's very, very exciting to have you in the show. And I hope that we get to continue working together long after the show is gone and things too. But I'll be excited to see your work in person too, and see how things develop with you over time. And I hope that the show brings positive attention to the work you're doing, and some more opportunities for you.
Definitely. So. I think that, like, seeing the work online, I was blown away by the show. I think that the collection you guys have put together is really beautiful. And I know I've started following a lot of the fellow artists, and really excited that I found them through the involvement in the show.
Well, that's the way it works. I mean, we're a community of people, so My goal in the show, it really is to expose all the different variety of stories, and that there is this diversity within our community that is not sort of a, white male centered, rich white male centered values and things, which I think is definitely a part of the history of the queer community that has overshadowed things. And so at this time, it's okay, well, what are we doing to make sure that everyone knows that there's all these other stories out there that are unique and important? So I think we've only scratched the surface of it. So
yeah.
I'm so happy that you're a part of that. So
thank you. I'm really happy to be a part of it. And I'm really excited about the show. I've been wanting to get people in to see it, and then I'm like, oh, it's only online, but just go online and look at it.
It'll happen. We're excited to do it. So thank you again for taking the time. I know there's a large time gap between us and everything, and we had some issues getting things scheduled with me being sick and you traveling.
I'm just so glad you're better.
Me too.
Yeah,
me too. I think I got very, 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 very lucky. So
yeah.
I'm trying to focus on my gratitude for for that. So but,
yeah.
Thank you.
Health is most important.
Yes, thank you. And please take care and reach out to me as your projects develop. And I'd love to help promote your work and collaborate with you in the future too. So
I would love that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great one.
How do you say goodbye in Portuguese?
Ciao.
Ciao. Oh, okay. Well, that was easy.
I just had a little brain fart, but that's okay.
I totally understand. Okay.
Yeah, answered a lot.
Have a great. Ciao.
Bye. Ciao.